it's important to say that Europeans didn't condemn China at the time, when the war started. It was very interesting, actually. Their attitude was to look to China to help mediate the situation. In other words, to use the fact that it had a good relationship with Russia and Ukraine as a basis of mediation to bring the war to an end. And so the European reaction response to China was quite friendly, not hostile. I mean, less hostile, it's been more antagonistic, as you know, but less, if anything, less than it had before. But of course, that cannot go on forever, because either China does mediate in some way or other, or it doesn't. And if it doesn't mediate, then that sort of positive feeling towards China, that China can actually help us sort this problem out, no longer has that much credibility or traction in the situation. So I think that, and I think that's roughly where we are now, that people still hope that China might, but because the war's going on for a long time, and I think it will go on for quite a bit longer personally, then attitudes towards China are likely to become more negative, I guess. Now, the other aspect of this is that, of course, the Western attitude towards China ever since 2017 and Trump has been increasingly antagonistic. So, I mean, and China's been, in my opinion, attacked in a way which has been quite wrong and fundamentally misconceived. So now, what is going to happen now? Well, I think America is probably going to emerge strengthened from this situation. And more prepared to try and divide the world in a way that it was before Russia's invasion. After all, we were seeing that in its attitude towards China. So that was already well-established position. And you mentioned AUKUS and so on, absolutely right. This was part of the same thing, the Quad, all of this. Now, so, I think that the effect of Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been to accelerate negative trends in the world and potentially negative attitudes towards China. I don't think it's inevitable, but I think it's going to be tough. I've always argued, and I think that Russia and China are very different. And this has got a bit lost. It's got a bit lost for two reasons. One, because ever since 2017, basically, the West has tried to brand China as, another communist country, like the Soviet Union. So what's the difference? We had the Soviet Union in the Cold War, now we've got China. Now, I think this is fundamentally mistaken position. I do not think, actually, that China or the Chinese Communist Party is like the Soviet Union or like the Soviet Communist Party. They are extremely different. Chinese attitudes are very different from Russian attitudes. And I think for China, it's in China's interest not to allow this conflation, which of course Biden's trying to do, autocracy. He's trying to say, brand China as the same as Russia. What Russia's done. China can do the same thing, So I think this is a very negative, even dangerous road, with bad consequences for China. Because if, I don't think that, well, of course, there's a whole question of Taiwan and so on. Leave that on one side. That's a very important factor, but leave it on one side. I mean, the kind of economic warfare that America and the West is conducting against Russia, it's clearly transferable to its relationship with China. And that would be bad for China because, it needs, it does a lot of trade. It's got a big economic relationship with both the United States and Europe. So it's difficult not to conclude from the situation that what we saw starting in 2017 was the process of separation between China and the United States at the behest of the United States. And this process is continuing. And therefore, America is trying to divide the world as far as possible on its terms to its benefit. This is the typical American position, which is to countries it does not like, it regards as enemies or threats, it will seek to separate from, even divide, even fence off. I think if America could have another full Cold War, it would be okay about that. And we don't want that. That would be disastrous. That would be really serious. So it's very important to keep these connections. Now, of course, China's in a totally different situation to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had a mentality where it accepted that situation. It was, in a way, it had, it believed in world revolution, kind of, and the Soviet system versus the American system, and we will win. And this was a big mistake. China does not have that mentality. China wants to be part of one world. It seeks cooperation. It seeks coexistence and so on. And that's very important. So how China itself plays this situation, and it operates in the situation is very, very important. It's got to find a way of preventing further collateral damage to itself from what has happened. Quite frankly, from China's point of view, I think Russia's military action in the Ukraine will have negative consequences. I think that is most likely. It's not inevitable, but I think it's most likely. And so the question is, how can we engage in a way in damage limitation?
Exactly. Really, how to prevent from further escalation of the conflict as well as collateral damage is very essential. And we all want peace, not war or death.
Yes, and let me say that I don't think Putin had any of these. This was not why Putin went in. His calculation was different. It was about Russia. It wasn't about the global situation. It wasn't about the impact on elsewhere and so on. It was an attempt to kind of, I understood why they felt so angry, that they've been humiliated and so on. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to invade somewhere, because that can be even more counterproductive than what's happened already. So we have to find a way of preventing what I regard to be a very serious negative development in the world. Now, there is one rider I would say to this, which I think is interesting, and that's why anything I say has to be qualified by the fact that, I am a Westerner, I live in this kind of atmosphere, I have to deal with it every day and so on. But if you look at the world from somewhere else, then it doesn't necessarily look quite like that. And I think, I think the most promising development of all to come out of this is what is India's response. This is very, very important, because I had a feeling that India was drifting towards a relationship with the West. And the most important evidence of this is the Quad. But actually, India has had more or less the same position as China in response to the invasion. It's kept its relationship with Russia. It's refused to go along with all the demands that India does this and does that and joins the sanctions and all that. This is very promising. So what I would like to see, and coming out of this, and I would regard this to be extraordinarily positive development, is some new relationship between China and India. And I think this is a great challenge to Chinese statecraft to find a way of doing this. And it will require the key issue is the border dispute. And China doesn't, in my view, understand it in a way that China doesn't think it's, it would like to solve it, but it doesn't understand, I don't think, properly, sufficiently, that for India, the border, its defeat in the border war, which it made lots of tactical errors. I mean, it made its own errors. It created the situation, but India feels humiliated. To this day, it cannot get 1962 out of its head. So who is going to get 1962 out of India's head? There is only one country that can do that, and that is China. And if that opened a new positive relationship between China and India, that would be fantastic. And I would say, look, if that can happen out of this situation, that's a huge positive.